I'm Keith Williams. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Lancaster Conservancy, and today we're at the Turkey Hill Preserve and going to explore the Turkey Hill Trail. Above us, we've got the active Lancaster landfill that's got two windmills on it to produce electricity to help operate the Turkey Hill dairy and also the landfill. Below us, we've got an active rail line and an old rail line. And then in between those two kind of industrial complexes, we've got this remnant of really amazing riverlands geography. So you've got steep cliff faces, you've got exposed schist bedrock, you've got the characteristic plant communities that define the lower Susquehanna Riverlands region, including pawpaw. Right? And here's our first one. Right? Big paddle-shaped leaves. Right? It's hard to confuse these with anything else. They've got these ginormous paddle-shaped leaves. And these will get pretty tall, right? So this is a little one. We'll see some bigger ones. In fact, right there is one. See that big tree right there? It's a pawpaw. When I look at these pawpaw leaves, especially with the light coming through, I feel like it's definitely a tropical looking plant, but totally native to this part of the country, to this part of the world. And really just eastern US is really the only place that they occur. They've been here forever, essentially. I mean, certainly been here before Europeans arrived. Part of the system, since the system evolved together. This is a good example, right? So you got smooth bark for starters, right? So you look for that smooth bark, big palm leaves, right? That's another giveaway that are alternate. Right about Labor Day is when you start seeing these fruits mature, right? Pre-Labor Day, you'll see the fruits. I started seeing fruits probably about middle of August is when I first started noticing the smaller ones. You can probably find them, if you look really closely, you can probably find them starting in July, the really tiny little buds of the pawpaw fruit. But I started noticing them big enough in the canopy where you can see them from the ground, about a couple inches big in middle of August. And then right about Labor Day is when they start to become mature and start dropping to the ground. So it's an amazing food source when they fall on the ground, and so just about everybody eats them. I've seen pawpaw seeds in foxscat, possibly coyotes, so small mammals, right? Raccoons, possum, coyotes, fox. Birds will eat the seeds as well. They're pretty large seeds, so they're pretty obvious when you see them on the ground. Birds will eat the seeds and help disperse them. They're incredibly important for, in fact, without pawpaws, we wouldn't have zebra swallowtails. So most people know the tiger swallowtails, right? They're the really big yellow butterflies. The zebra swallowtails almost look like that, but they're like a pale creamy color, and they're smaller, and they've got these really neat, dark, long tails. The caterpillars of the zebra swallowtail are entirely dependent on pawpaw. So pawpaw are the only host plant for zebra swallowtails. Without pawpaw, the zebra swallowtail wouldn't survive. And we're fairly certain that the zebra swallowtails accumulate annanisins. So the pawpaw has a natural insecticide in its tissue called annanisins. And we think that the zebra swallowtails accumulate that annanisin, which make them almost predator-proof, right? Nobody wants to eat that zebra swallowtail because of the annanisin, just like nobody wants to eat the monarch because of the cardenaloids. They're tasty. They're very, very ephemeral, which is part of their attraction. But I think the plant itself is even more amazing than the fruit. You come out into a pawpaw grove like this, and just being in here, right, and the shade that these plants provide, and the size of the leaves, and the size of the pawpaw trees, and just being in the place is amazing. But then thinking through the pollination system is incredible, right? So the tactic that these pawpaw use is they attract flies and carrion beetles. So rather than using a very brightly colored flower that smells really, really good, that produces nectar, and nectar is the attractant to get, the stereotypical pollinators in like bees and butterflies, they use a deep maroon flower that looks like rotting meat and faintly smells like rotting meat to be pollinated by flies. And so the time to see that is in the spring. So April into May, by June they're usually senescing, the flowers are usually senescing, but the flowers are absolutely beautiful. I mean, they're about, an inch in diameter, ½ inch to an inch in diameter, really deep, beautiful maroon, and all different kinds of pollinators come into those flowers. And so if you find a pawpaw flower, just stand there and watch it for a couple of minutes and see who comes and visits. You're gonna see everything from a bunch of different kinds of flies, different kinds of beetles, carrion beetles, which, talk about ecosystem services. And these things are one of the reasons why we don't have dead stuff all over the place, right? They find dead things Some of the species of carrion beetles bury those dead things with an egg inside, and that develops into a beetle larva that eats the dead carcass, which is a great service for us. And it's just incredible watching the parade of different kinds of pollinators that come to that really, really beautiful flower. And then we wind up with these great fruits in the summer, late summer. You know, the ones I've tasted are kind of like a custardy banana, or like a banana mango. Like they've got a banana taste and texture with a bit of a mango tartness to it. Yeah, I mean, I eat them like a banana, right? You just kind of, I don't prepare it anyway. I know some folks are making ice cream out of it, some folks are making beer out of it, but you just peel it and eat it. Some people get a little bit nauseous if they eat the skin. I think because the annonicins. I've never had that problem, but I know some people that do. So some people will peel it and eat it that way. You kind of eat it like a mango. It feels like pawpaws are certainly becoming more and more trendy. They're certainly getting a lot more attention recently than what they have in past years. Most of the pawpaws that I've seen, they're in the woods, right? That's their preferred habitat. The ones around here tend to grow on steep slopes. I've seen them in Maryland growing on relatively flat ground, but again, in the understory of a tree, or of a forest rather. We really don't manage specifically for pawpaw, but we manage for multi-species, right? So we want to maintain the diversity that's here, and a lot of that is really about invasive species control. So we've got a number of invasive species on this preserve, and really all of our preserves that get in and take over and reduce that biodiversity to a monoculture, basically. And so we've got a number of volunteers that have adopted this preserve, and part of their job is to keep the trail open. And part of their job is to do whatever they can to control invasive species. And things like, Japanese honeysuckle, which is a vine. And here we go. This is a great example. You see this. See how this Japanese honeysuckle is growing right up this pawpaw tree, right? And it's just going to strangle it, basically. And so that's one of the biggest things that we do to maintain biodiversity on our preserves, is manage for those invasive species and we're never going to get rid of them, but we try to keep them under control. We ask that when folks visit conservancy preserves that they don't forage for anything, right? Pawpaws or anything else. Because we ask people to follow leave no trace principles, and things like, stay on trail, pick up after your dog, keep your dog on lead, pack your trash out, things like that. If one person comes on a preserve and gathers, half a dozen pawpaw, it's not a big deal. Multiply that by the hundreds of thousands of visitors that we see annually at our preserves, and all of a sudden, the vegetation off trail becomes trampled. There's no pawpaw left for wildlife to eat, and things like that. State game lands allow people to forage for their own personal use. So folks can go to Pennsylvania state game lands and forage for pawpaw. The way to harvest the pawpaw is you don't break the branch, you don't break the tree. If you see a pawpaw up there, you shake the tree, and when the pawpaw is ripe, it'll fall. If it's not ripe and you break it off, chances are it's not going to ripen off the tree. I mean, they're native, right? And so they're a natural part of this ecosystem that's been part of this ecological fabric for eons. And so pawpaw, or any other native species for that matter, are part of that whole system. And so when we lose one of those species, then the system becomes weaker, right? So if we were to lose pawpaw, certainly that wouldn't cause the ecosystem to crash, right? But if we lose enough of those species, the system's going to crash. It's kind of like rivets on a plane. How many rivets can be missing from an airplane before it falls out of the sky, right? Each one of these species is a rivet. That's number one. Number two is there's a number of benefits that come with protecting land. Benefits for us as humans, right? We need these green spaces for our own physical, spiritual, mental health. And COVID certainly showed that, right? We need these green spaces for clean air and clean water. But we also need these spaces for biodiversity protection. And we're losing species at a frightening pace globally. And that includes here, right? So we don't have a ton of threatened and endangered species that we're specifically managing for. But the time to conserve something is when it's common. Because when it becomes threatened or endangered or less common, it's a lot of times too late. And so when you look in North America, for example, and you look at the bird decline, that we've seen a significant decline in the biomass and the abundance of birds in the last 50 years. Same thing with insects, and the bird decline is directly related to insect decline, and all of that is related to habitat loss. Habitat loss due to development and habitat loss due to invasive species, non-native things that get in, take over, and become a monoculture. And so protecting the pawpaw is just as important as protecting the spice bush, is just as important as protecting, native violets, for example. It's all part of that fabric of the ecosystem that keeps those benefits alive for us.